Well, hi everyone. Welcome to the Eclectic Producer, and also welcome to 2022. Certainly hope this year is better than the last two have been, so let's keep our fingers crossed. In the interim, I was able to make quite a bit of progress and was really having some really good successes with the Ender 6. However, coupled with all the really good progress, there were also some really dismal failures. And the biggest issue, I think, had to do with the BLTouch. I went back and forth with Creality and emails over the time frame, and of course, because of holidays and everything else, that was pretty slow going. Ultimately, they decided that, yes, in fact, there is something wrong with either the BLTouch or the firmware. So they're sending me a new BLTouch, and we'll see what that does, and if not, then we'll start looking at the firmware. But there were some really interesting results with that, which I'll talk about later. As far as the positive results with it, things were really good working with PETG. Granted, it's kind of stringy and it makes a little bit of a mess, but the end results are quite good. As you can see, this is the beginning of my R2 dome, and this is in PETG. Now, granted, this has been cleaned up. The original parts don't look like this. This would be a little bit more typical of how they turn out. Lots of stringing, lots of little blobs and things, but it cleans up quite nicely. These pieces in the middle here are actually supports that were temporarily added to this particular model, so they come out, so it's not too bad. But overall, it's working quite nicely when it works. However, what I was finding is I could do 3 or 4 of these sections, which take anywhere from 24 to 31 hours or so per panel. I mean, here's the latest panel. The first one of these I dropped and accidentally broke it, but this is kind of messy, but it'll clean up nicely. But the problem is, after spending all that time on a panel, you don't want it to fail or have any issues. Unfortunately, that happens. After 3 or 4, I would get one that would start to print, maybe, or it would never start. I would try to get the bed leveling to go, and literally there were a couple times when I would spend 4 or 5 hours trying to get the bed level right, and it's like, okay, this is not correct. So finally I went in and just turned it all off. Only use the BLTouch right now for a Z-axis limit switch, and for that it's working pretty nicely, and setting the initial height. But right now I'm not using the BLTouch for doing automatic bed leveling. It's just not working. The other thing to talk about is the cover. If you recall, last time I had just gotten both, the full cover. It's a top and bottom, and it completely encloses the top of the Ender 6. It also normally has hinges, which you have to install, which I did initially, and I was really excited. I was hoping that we would be able to start printing some ABS as opposed to the PETG. So I went through, used the cover. I did have to make one modification though, and that is I wanted to cut out the little opening in here, because it does have a hole for the Bowden tube to go through, but I wanted to be able to take the cover on and off easily without having to deal with the Bowden tube. So I made a little notch in here so I could feed it through that way. But other than that, it seemed like things were going really good. I was doing, my temperature towers and overhang tests and getting all the parameters dialed in. And I thought, oh, this is going to be great. The ABS is going to be nice. It didn't smell too much. Everything seemed to be working really nicely. Until I started working with it. All the pieces I had done before were, test pieces. So they were running for an hour max. So I decided to run one taller piece, which was actually, similar to this one, but not exactly. And I thought, okay, let's see what's going to happen. This is going to be nice. So I put the cover on, came back in an hour or so, and was in for a big surprise. Notice how the Bowden tube and cable assembly are fairly high. And initially, when I started all of this, they were sitting up at a very high angle like this, and no problem at all. When I went and put the cover on it, You can see that the back portion of the cover now would start to push the cable assembly down. Initially, most of it was up like this. Sometimes it would rub against the surface of the cover, but not really a problem. And so I thought, okay, that's fine. When the full cover was on, and remember that there were hinges in here, everything fits very nicely. The cable had been running along the back and really no problem at all. And with all of the tests that I've been running, they were small parts running maybe an hour or so, no real issues with them. And so I thought, okay, running with ABS is going to be perfect. So when I did the first big part, I was in for a surprise. The first thing that happened is this cable started to droop in the back, and I'll uncover it now to show you. Initially what had happened is that this cable was dropping down so low, I've got a support in here now, that it got down in here, assembly moved back, this cable got trapped back behind here, and at that point everything shut down, it just bound up. I stopped the print, tried to figure out what to do, and finally came up with a temporary solution, which I'm still using, of taking just a little coffee stirrer, a little wooden one, and just jamming it up inside the tube and holding it up a little bit. And that seemed to be just about right. It worked fine. There were no problems at all, and I continue to work that way. So I'm pretty happy with it for the time being. I do need a better solution, probably a regular cable support system or cable chain, whatever they call it, that would go in there. That would be great. But right now this is good enough. However, there was another problem that occurred. After I got that solved and started printing again in ABS with the higher temperatures, running with a bed temperature of 100 degrees C and a nozzle temperature of around 255, 260 C, it got pretty warm in there. When the full cover is on, and especially when I first started this, I did have the hinges in here so that these two pieces were definitely fixed together. Everything was running great for maybe 3 or 4 hours. I'm not exactly sure how long it was. But then suddenly I heard this horrible noise. I was in the other room and came in, and what had happened is that this back piece had gotten warm, expanded, and the bottom of it spread out down here, opened up, and dropped down like this. And because it was open, and because the hinge was on top here, this piece went something like that and got pulled down inside. And so I had an absolute mess. There was a part that was inside of it being printed. It fell over, got jammed in the belt assembly, and everything stopped. It was trying to do something, but it was really a mess. So I ended up taking the hinge off, keeping them in 2 separate pieces, and basically using the front portion of it whenever I needed to. As you can see, the last few weeks have been kind of a challenge with the Ender 6. Overall, it has worked really, really well, and some of these parts really look great. However, there have been a few real issues that have been more than a challenge, let's say. The BLTouch obviously isn't working right now, and as I mentioned, they are sending me a new one, so we'll see what happens. Manual bed leveling isn't too bad. With the silicone mounts in there rather than the springs, it's pretty repeatable. I can set it once, and it usually goes for 5 or 6 prints, maybe more, without really needing much adjustment. And so no complaints there. The cover, on the other hand, I'm only going to use the front half. If I require a little bit of extra heat, sometimes the PETG on colder nights does appreciate that extra heat. Running with the full cover, though, that's kind of a scary situation because of the expansion of that back piece and the fact that it's settled down. I mean, that needs some sort of support or bracing or something to keep that from happening. So anyway, I'll keep you informed on how this process is going. I also got started doing some printing with the Elegoo Mars 2 Pro and have had some pretty good successes with that as well. That's actually a very nice device. So thank you for watching, and next time we'll look into doing some resin printing with the Elegoo Mars 2 Pro. Until next time, take care. Thanks.